There's a particular kind of morning millions of women over 60 know all too well. You wake up, swing your legs over the side of the bed, stand up, and those first 10 or 15 steps feel like your knees have aged 20 years overnight. Every movement is stiff. Every step reminds you something has changed. Then something confusing happens. By the time you've had your morning coffee and started moving around the house, the pain begins to ease. You tell yourself, maybe it was just a bad morning. Until tomorrow comes, and it happens again, day after day. If that sounds familiar, I want you to know something that could completely change how you think about your knees. This isn't simply the price of getting older, and it isn't something you have to quietly accept. It's a specific, well-understood process happening inside your joints. More importantly, it's one of the few age-related conditions that often responds remarkably well to the right everyday habits, once you understand what's actually causing it. Today, I'll show you exactly what's happening inside your knees, why so many women notice these changes after menopause, and the 5 research-backed strategies that can reduce pain, improve mobility, and help protect your joints for years to come. But stay with me until the end, because I'll also show you the one warning sign many people ignore for far too long, the point where home remedies are no longer enough, and it's time to talk with your doctor. Here's a statistic most people never hear. Roughly 18% of women over 60 are living with osteoarthritis. Even more surprising, women are nearly twice as likely to develop it as men of the same age. That isn't a coincidence. There's a very specific biological reason your joints often begin changing around menopause. Once you understand that reason, you'll stop thinking of arthritis as something that simply happens with age and start seeing where you actually have the power to make a difference. Across the United States, more than 34 million adults live with osteoarthritis. It costs the healthcare system well over $100 billion every year, making it one of the country's most common chronic conditions. Yet, here's the surprising part. Most people don't learn how to manage it until significant joint damage has already occurred. That's unfortunate, because the biggest opportunity to protect your joints usually comes much earlier, when small, consistent changes can still have an outsized impact. I'm Dr. William Mercer. I spend my time reviewing the latest research on joint health and healthy aging, then translating it into practical advice you can actually use. No miracle products, no expensive programs, just what the evidence consistently supports, and just as importantly, what it doesn't. So why does this become so common after 60? And why are women affected so much more than men? The answer begins with cartilage. Cartilage is the smooth, flexible tissue covering the ends of your bones, allowing your joints to glide without painful friction. Think of it like the tread on a tire. When it's new, it handles pressure effortlessly. But after decades of supporting your body through millions of steps, that protective layer gradually becomes thinner, especially in hard-working joints like your knees and hips. But wear and tear is only part of the story. Here's the piece many people never hear. Estrogen plays a measurable role in keeping cartilage healthy. It supports the cells responsible for maintaining and repairing it, while also helping control inflammation inside the joint. When estrogen drops during menopause, that natural protection drops with it. That's why so many women notice their knees becoming stiffer or more painful during their 50s and 60s, even if nothing about their lifestyle has changed. And the evidence is stronger than many people realize. Studies have found that women receiving estrogen therapy often show less cartilage damage on imaging than women who aren't. That doesn't mean hormone therapy is the answer for everyone, but it tells us something important. This isn't simply random wear and tear. There's real biology behind it. There's one more piece of the puzzle. Hormones explain part of the story, but every single step you take matters too. When you're walking on level ground, your knees typically absorb around 1.5 times your body weight with every step. Climb a flight of stairs, and that force can rise to 2 or even 3 times your body weight. Now, multiply that by thousands of steps every week, year after year, decade after decade. Suddenly, it's much easier to understand how even gradual cartilage loss eventually becomes pain you can feel. And that brings us to something most people never expect. One of the 5 changes we'll discuss later can dramatically reduce that stress every time you take a step, and it may be the highest impact change in this entire video. Now let's talk about what actually helps. The first mistake is one almost everyone makes. The moment your knees start hurting, your instinct is to protect them. So you sit more, walk less, avoid the stairs. It feels like the safest thing you can do. But for most people with osteoarthritis, it's exactly the opposite of what your joints need. Movement isn't the enemy. The right movement is part of the treatment. The goal isn't to move less, it's to move in a way that strengthens your joints without constantly punishing them. That's why swimming and water aerobics are often considered the gold standard for painful knees. And once you understand why, it makes perfect sense. Water supports much of your body weight, taking a tremendous amount of pressure off your knees and hips while still allowing you to move through a full range of motion. If the water reaches about chest level, your joints may be carrying only a fraction of the load they normally handle on land. At the same time, the water naturally provides gentle resistance, helping strengthen the muscles that support your knees. Think about what that means. You're building strength, improving circulation, and restoring movement without asking your knees to absorb thousands of painful impacts. Very few forms of exercise offer that combination. I often think about a woman I'll call Barbara. When her knee pain became worse, she stopped exercising completely. She honestly believed every step was causing more damage. Her daughter finally convinced her to try a local water aerobica class. Barbara wasn't excited. She expected another disappointment. But a few months later, she described something she hadn't felt in over a year. For the first time, she could bend and move her knee without immediately bracing for pain. That wasn't because she stopped moving. It was because she started moving differently. If pain has been keeping you away from exercise altogether, water may be the safest and most encouraging place to begin again. Now, here's something that surprises almost everyone. The next recommendation doesn't even look like exercise. It's yoga, or more specifically, gentle stretching combined with balance training. Swimming builds strength, but it doesn't solve another major contributor to arthritis pain: stiff muscles. Over time, the muscles, tendons, and connective tissues surrounding an arthritic joint become tighter. That tightness changes the way your knee moves, placing extra stress on areas that are already irritated. Gentle stretching helps restore flexibility, allowing the joint to move more naturally while taking some of that unnecessary strain away. But that's only half the benefit. Pain quietly changes the way people walk. Most people don't even realize it's happening. A slight limp, a shorter step, a brief hesitation before putting weight on one leg. None of those changes seem important by themselves, but repeat them thousands of times over months and years, and they slowly affect your balance. That's one reason people with knee arthritis are more likely to fall. Yoga helps interrupt that cycle. It doesn't just improve flexibility, it improves stability, coordination, confidence, and that's every bit as important. Here's what many people misunderstand. They think they need to be flexible before trying yoga. The truth is exactly the opposite. You don't start yoga because you're flexible. You become flexible because you practice yoga. Even a chair-based beginner class is a perfectly legitimate place to start. In fact, many senior centers offer these classes specifically because so many people are dealing with joint pain. If you remember just one sentence from this section, remember this. Yoga isn't for flexible people. It's how people become more flexible. Now let's move from movement to something that's probably sitting in your kitchen right now, your food. Because arthritis isn't simply caused by worn-out joints. Inflammation plays a much bigger role than most people realize. In fact, two people can have very similar joint damage on an X-ray, yet experience completely different levels of pain. One major reason is inflammation. The more inflammation surrounding a joint, the more sensitive that joint often becomes. That's why what you eat every day matters. The strongest research doesn't support a strict arthritis diet filled with forbidden foods. Instead, it consistently points toward a Mediterranean-style eating pattern. More vegetables, more fruit, fatty fish like salmon and sardines several times each week, olive oil instead of heavily processed oils, and fewer ultra-processed foods and sugary drinks, both of which are linked to higher levels of inflammation throughout the body. You may also have heard about turmeric, particularly its active ingredient called curcumin. Early research suggests it may have anti-inflammatory properties. That's encouraging, but it's important to keep it in perspective. The evidence isn't strong enough to call it a treatment on its own. Think of it as something that may support an already healthy eating pattern, not replace one. And in just a moment, we'll get to the change that often has the biggest overall impact on knee pain, because it doesn't just reduce stress on your joints, it changes what's happening inside them as well. I remember a man I'll call Walter. For years, he dismissed dietary advice because it sounded far too simple to make any real difference. Then his rheumatologist said something that completely changed the way he looked at food. Your diet isn't just failing to help your joints, it's quietly working against every other treatment you're trying. Walter had never thought about it that way. He didn't overhaul his entire lifestyle overnight. He simply replaced a few processed dinners each week with fish, vegetables, and healthier meals. Nothing dramatic, nothing extreme. But within a few months, he noticed something he wasn't expecting. His knees didn't suddenly become perfect. They simply felt calmer, less irritated, less angry, and that made it easier to stay active. That's an important lesson. No single food cures arthritis, but the way you eat every day can gradually change the environment your joints live in. Sometimes that's enough to tip the balance in your favor. Now, let's stop for just a moment. Look at what we've already covered. Water-based exercise helps you move without punishing your joints. Yoga restores flexibility, balance, and confidence. A Mediterranean-style eating pattern helps calm inflammation from the inside out. Notice what all three have in common. None of them promise overnight results. None of them are miracle cures. They're simply small habits that become surprisingly powerful when you repeat them week after week. That's exactly what decades of research continue to support. Before we move on, there's one myth I want you to stop believing today. Many people still think cracking their knuckles, or any of their joints, causes arthritis. Fortunately, that's simply not true. Despite generations of warnings, researchers have never found convincing evidence that ordinary joint cracking causes osteoarthritis. So if you've been feeling guilty every time your fingers crack, you can finally let that worry go. Now, we're coming to the change that may have the biggest overall impact in this entire video. And surprisingly, it isn't a medication, it isn't a supplement, and it doesn't require expensive equipment. It starts with one number, your body weight. Here's a statistic that's genuinely eye-opening. For every single pound of body weight you lose, the pressure on your knees while walking drops by roughly 4 pounds. Pause and picture that for a second. Lose 10 pounds, and every single step places about 40 pounds less pressure on your knees. Every walk, every staircase, every trip to the grocery store, every time you get up from your favorite chair, day after day, year after year. And here's what makes that even more remarkable. That's only half the story, and here's the other half of the story. Losing weight doesn't just take pressure off your knees, it changes what's happening inside them. Your body fat, especially around your waist, is biologically active. It releases inflammatory chemicals into your bloodstream, creating a second source of irritation inside your joints. In other words, extra weight affects your knees in 2 different ways. It increases the physical load they carry, while also increasing the inflammation they're constantly dealing with. That's exactly why healthy weight loss can make such a remarkable difference. Research has shown that people with knee osteoarthritis who lose just 5 to 10% of their body weight often experience meaningful improvements in both pain and everyday function. In fact, major rheumatology organizations recommend healthy weight loss as a core part of treating knee osteoarthritis, not simply something that's nice to do. But this is also where many people feel defeated. Maybe you've even said these words yourself. My knees hurt too much to exercise. But if I can't exercise, how am I supposed to lose weight? It's an incredibly frustrating cycle. The good news is you don't have to break it all at once. You only have to find a way in. And that's exactly why we started this video with water-based exercise. Swimming and water aerobics allow you to move before your knees are ready for long walks or higher impact activities. As your muscles become stronger, moving becomes easier. As moving becomes easier, losing weight becomes more realistic, and as the weight comes down, your knees become more comfortable. Each improvement makes the next one easier. Instead of feeling trapped in a cycle that works against you, your body slowly begins working with you. If I could recommend just one change with the biggest overall return, this would probably be it, because it reduces pressure, calms inflammation, and makes every other healthy habit easier to keep doing. Now, here's something almost everyone gets wrong on a painful day. Should you use heat or cold? The answer depends entirely on what's happening inside your joint. Heat and cold aren't interchangeable. They solve completely different problems. Heat, a warm bath, heating pad, or warm towel, helps relax stiff muscles, improves blood flow, and prepares your joints to move more comfortably. That's why it's usually the better choice first thing in the morning or before physical activity. Cold works differently. An ice pack wrapped in a towel for about 15 to 20 minutes helps calm active inflammation and reduce swelling. That's why it's usually the better choice after activity or during a painful flare-up. If you remember only one rule, make it this: heat before movement, cold after too much movement. Using the wrong one at the wrong time can sometimes make your symptoms worse. Heat may increase swelling in an already inflamed joint. Ice can leave stiff morning muscles feeling even tighter. There's one more everyday habit that's surprisingly easy to overlook: your shoes. Every step you take begins at your feet. If your shoes are worn out, unsupportive, or no longer absorbing impact properly, more of that force travels directly into your knees and hips. One step doesn't seem like much, but thousands of steps every week, month after month, year after year, those extra forces quietly add up. The good news? Unlike many of the changes we've talked about today, supportive footwear can begin helping the moment you put it on. Sometimes the simplest improvements are the ones people overlook the longest. So if you remember only 3 things from today: heat for stiffness, cold for swelling, and never underestimate what a supportive pair of shoes can do for your knees. Now, take a step back for a moment. None of these 5 strategies were ever meant to work alone. They work together. Swimming makes movement easier. Movement supports healthy weight loss. Weight loss reduces both pressure and inflammation. Stretching helps your joints move the way they were designed to. Healthy eating helps calm the inflammatory environment inside your body. And heat, cold, and supportive footwear make everyday life more comfortable while those longer-term changes quietly do their work. That's how real progress usually happens, not through one miracle treatment, but through several small decisions. Repeated consistently until one day you realize your knees are doing things they couldn't do a few months ago. Now, let's answer one final question. When is it time to stop managing this yourself and speak with your doctor? There are several signs you shouldn't ignore. Pain that hasn't improved after several months of consistently trying the strategies we've discussed. Pain that regularly wakes you during the night. A knee that locks, catches, or suddenly feels like it might give way. A joint that's noticeably changing shape. Or difficulty doing everyday activities that once felt completely routine. Walking through the grocery store, climbing stairs, getting out of a chair, or stepping into your car. But there's another warning sign that often goes unnoticed. Pay attention to the things you've quietly stopped doing. Maybe you've stopped gardening, stopped taking evening walks, stopped dancing, stopped playing on the floor with your grandchildren. Or maybe you've simply started saying no to invitations because you already know your knees won't cooperate. That quiet withdrawal is often just as important as the pain itself, because arthritis doesn't just affect joints. If we're not careful, it slowly begins shrinking our lives. That's exactly why it's worth bringing up with your doctor. And remember, needing medical help does not automatically mean surgery. Many people improve with physical therapy, targeted exercises, injections, medications, or other treatments long before joint replacement is ever considered. But getting evaluated earlier gives you something incredibly valuable: more options, more choices, and often better outcomes. Before we finish, I'd like you to think of one person: a sister, a close friend, a neighbor, someone who's quietly stopped doing something they used to love because of knee pain. Share this video with them. Sometimes the most meaningful thing you can give someone isn't another reminder to see a doctor someday. Sometimes it's simply giving them a place to start. Now I'd love to hear from you. Which of these 5 changes are you going to try first? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely enjoy reading them, and your experience might encourage someone else who's going through the same thing. As always, everything we've discussed today is for educational purposes and should never replace advice from your own healthcare provider, especially if you're experiencing any of the warning signs we've talked about. My goal on this channel is simple: to take the best available research and turn it into practical advice you can actually use to protect your health and the people you love. Before you go, I'd like you to think back to where we began. Those first painful steps out of bed, the stiffness, the hesitation, the quiet thought, maybe this is just what getting older feels like. Now imagine waking up a few months from now, standing up, taking those same first steps, and realizing they're just a little easier. Not because you found one miracle cure, but because you gave your knees something they've been asking for all along: consistent care. Joint pain after 60 isn't something you simply have to surrender to. Your knees have carried you through every chapter of your life. They've carried you through work, through family, through celebrations, through heartbreak, through ordinary days that became precious memories. Maybe now, it's your turn to carry them for a change. Thank you so much for watching. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.
Dr. William Mercer.